Look at this cell. Now imagine it becoming your entire world. No open yard, no conversations, no second of real freedom. Just concrete, steel, and the constant knowledge that the men on the other side of that door would end you if they ever got close enough. This is Chris Watts' life now. A sentence built on isolation, routine, and fear, where the clock doesn't move, and every day feels exactly like the one before it. The only question left is simple: how long can someone survive a life that never actually lets you live?
So the court is going to sentence Mr. Watts as follows. With regard to count number 1, murder in the first degree as it relates to Shanann Watts, the court is going to sentence you, sir, to a life sentence in the Colorado Department of Corrections, followed, with no possibility of parole. And that is going to run consecutively to all but counts 3 and 4. With regard to count 2, as it relates to murder in the first degree with Bella, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to count number 3, the court is going to sentence you as it relates to Celeste to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections with no possibility of parole. With regard to counts 4 and 5 relating to Bella and Celeste as a different theory of first-degree murder, the court is going to sentence you to life in the Colorado Department of Corrections, and legally those sentences must run concurrently as a different theory of first-degree murder. Recognizing the unlawful termination of pregnancy for the unborn child that has been named Nico, the court absolutely believes that the maximum sentence of 48 years would be appropriate to run consecutive to the other charges, with an additional mandatory parole period of 3 years as set forth by statute. With regard to count number 7, as it relates to tampering with a deceased body, as well as counts 8 and 9, each a class 3 felony, the court is going to impose a maximum sentence of 12 years each for those counts to run consecutively to the other counts. The court is going to order that statutory fees be paid and court costs. The court's going to grant the prosecution 91 days to file a notice of restitution, and that will be the sentence of the court. We will shortly be in recess. I would respectfully ask the parties that you remain in your seat. There is a plan by the deputies on allowing people to exit the courtroom, so please remain seated until you are authorized to leave the courtroom based on the direction of the deputies. Deputies, I would respectfully ask that you take this defendant into custody and have him serve the rest of his life in the Department of Corrections. We are in recess.
The moment the cameras went dark, Chris Watts entered a place meant to dismantle everything a man is, yet the world kept its focus on him. From the moment Chris Watts entered the prison system, one question followed him everywhere: what happens to a man whose crime horrified an entire country once the outside world moves on and the cell door locks for good? Most inmates disappear into routine, into noise, into crowds, but not him. The Colorado Department of Corrections made a calculated move. They quietly removed him from the state and sent him to Wisconsin, straight into Dodge Correctional Institution. That transfer wasn't a mercy. It was the beginning of his real punishment. Officials knew that leaving him in Colorado would have made him a walking target. Every inmate would recognize him. Every prisoner would know exactly what he did. And inside prison walls, one rule matters more than any other. People who hurt children don't last. But sending him to Wisconsin didn't spare him. It simply changed the way he would suffer. Picture the life he wakes up to every morning. His cell is about 6 feet by 9, smaller than many home closets. The walls are bare concrete. His bed is nothing more than a thin sheet of foam on a steel frame. There's a toilet and a sink, both exposed. No privacy, no comfort, no color. This cell is his world. For 23 hours a day, he sits in that box. Not for a week, not for a month. For years, his 1 hour of recreation isn't freedom. It's another empty room, just as confined. And he's alone there too. No other inmates, no conversations, no human connection beyond the officers who check on him from behind reinforced glass. This setup has a name: administrative segregation. Most people know it as solitary confinement. And decades of research agree, long-term isolation breaks the mind, thoughts become scattered. Time loses shape. The brain starts to create sensations that aren't real. People pace in circles for hours, talk to the walls, experience panic attacks, or sink into crushing depression. Prolonged solitude physically alters neural pathways, and this is the condition Chris Watts has lived in for years, the condition he will endure for decades. Every day inside that cell chips away at the edges of his mind. No therapy can fully undo that damage. No medication can restore the parts of a person that erode in silence and concrete. And yet, the isolation is only one layer of what he faces.
How are you doing?
I'm okay. How about you guys?
Good.
Good. I did not expect to see this, that's for sure.
Surprised.
Yeah.
Well, let me put some fears aside. We're not here for what you might think we might be here for.
Well, no, they didn't know what this, that's a computer room. I was like, I didn't know how to computer room.
Without computers.
I know it's so hard for you, Christopher. I can see it. I can see it in your face. I can see it in your eyes. And you will get through this.
He's in jail right now.
He's not doing well at all, and depression is setting in. Chris is alone in his cell for 23 hours a day. He's checked on every 5 or 10 minutes.
Inside these walls, empathy doesn't revolve around Chris Watts. It shifts toward the people who carry the weight of his presence every single day, because his arrival didn't just change his own life, it altered the lives of those who now have to manage him. Officers walk tighter routes because escorting a high-profile inmate is never routine. Every movement requires planning, coordination, and backup, because the wrong turn or an open door can turn a quiet shift into a crisis. They don't get to look away. They don't get to relax. They know that one careless second could put them at the center of an incident that can follow them for years. Some of these officers have families waiting at home, yet spend the day guarding a man who attracts attention, resentment, and danger unlike anyone else in their unit. That pressure isn't written in any policy manual, but it's real in every step they take. Empathy also reaches the inmates around him, men who have their own lives, their own battles, and their own fears. Many of them want nothing to do with him, yet his presence affects the energy of the entire block. High-profile offenders bring tension, whispers, unwanted attention from other units, and the kind of judgment inmates rarely voice openly, but always feel. Some see him as a symbol of a crime they despise. Others see him as a reminder that certain actions bring consequences you can never outrun. And whether they approve of him, hate him, or avoid him, the truth is that every inmate around him is impacted simply because of where he is placed and how closely he must be shielded. His security becomes their inconvenience. His reputation becomes their risk. Then there are the people outside these walls, the families who never asked to be pulled into this story, but are forced to relive it every time his name resurfaces. Every interview he gives, every letter that leaks, every message he sends, it reopens wounds that have refused to fully close. Some are trying to rebuild their lives, trying to find peace, trying to focus on anything other than the horror that changed their world forever. Yet the shadow of his choices continues to stretch far beyond the prison yard. They didn't step inside this cell with him, but they carry a burden that doesn't fade. In a system already stretched thin, his existence creates extra layers of work, extra layers of tension, and extra layers of watchfulness. His meals must be checked. his interactions monitored, his movements controlled, not because he is important, but because the consequences of a single mistake could be irreversible. And this responsibility falls on people who never committed a crime, never sought the spotlight, and never asked to be part of history. They simply have to live with the ripple effects of his actions, long after the courtroom closed. So the empathy here doesn't belong to Chris Watts. It belongs to everyone else caught in the gravity of his choices. The staff who protect him, the inmates who must live around him, and the families who continue to feel the emotional shockwave of a crime that changed the country. His sentence may be life without parole, but theirs became something they never asked for, a lifetime of being connected to a story they wish they could forget. Here's the part of Chris Watts' sentence that most people never fully understand. A death sentence eventually ends. There's a final moment, a point where the pain stops and everything is over. But the punishment Chris Watts is living through has no such ending. He's facing decades of unbroken hardship, decades of silence, decades of isolation, decades of walking into any room, knowing he is the most despised man there. Decades of living with what he did, with no distraction and no escape. His punishment isn't a single act of justice. It's justice stretched across the rest of his life, one identical day at a time. Every morning he opens his eyes is another reminder of the life he destroyed. Every night he closes them knowing tomorrow will offer no change. This isn't mercy, it's accountability without an expiration date. And what makes it even heavier is the certainty of it all. There is no parole, no possibility of release, no future to work toward. Nothing he does, no program, no apology, no expression of remorse, will ever shift his outcome. Most inmates have some form of hope. A hearing, a transfer, a review, a small chance at something better. Chris Watts has none of it. His path is fixed, he will die in prison, and every single day between now and that moment will look exactly like the one before. That kind of hopelessness becomes its own form of psychological punishment. But there's something else that makes his existence even more unbearable. Chris Watts isn't just another inmate serving time. He's a symbol, a name attached to one of the most horrifying family murders in recent American memory. Everyone in that institution knows who he is. Every officer, every prisoner. His crimes were dissected on every news network. Documentaries were made. Millions watched his interrogations and interviews. He has no privacy, no anonymity, no chance to fade into the background. And in prison, where reputation dictates everything, that makes him the lowest-ranking man inside those walls. Child killers are already treated as less than human, and Chris Watts went even further. He murdered his own daughter's children who trusted him completely. In 2020, Netflix released a documentary about the Watts family murders, and millions watched around the world. Overnight, the case was revived with a force no one expected. What might have slowly slipped out of the public conversation was suddenly everywhere again on social media, in reaction videos, in podcasts, in classrooms, and across true crime communities. That single documentary guaranteed that Chris Watts would never fade from public memory. A new generation, teenagers and young adults who barely knew the case existed, were now discovering every detail for the first time. They watched the police body cam footage from the morning Shannon was reported missing. They saw Watts standing on his porch, lying through his teeth, pretending to worry. They replayed his interviews, analyzing the hollow expressions, the controlled breathing, the subtle shifts in his eyes. They saw his false tears. They saw the moment his mask slipped, and they never forgot it. For Chris Watts, this meant something inescapable. His crimes will outlive him. His name will never vanish. His story will keep resurfacing, again and again, passed down through documentaries, interviews, and online analysis. Even decades from now, people will still know what he did. His legacy is sealed as one of the most haunting family murders in modern American history, and inside prison, that level of notoriety is dangerous. Even though Watts is held in protective custody, protection in prison is a fragile concept. History is filled with cases where inmates found ways to attack someone who was supposedly shielded. A guard could be distracted for a moment. A door could be left unsecured. A transfer could be mishandled. One mistake is all it takes for a protected inmate to become reachable. Watts lives with the knowledge that many prisoners, men serving life, men with nothing to lose, would attack him instantly if they had the chance. And in prison culture, harming a child killer doesn't just earn you respect, it can elevate you into a kind of dark legend. Hurting someone like Chris Watts brings status. It earns approval. In the twisted hierarchy of prison life, it makes you a hero. Imagine existing with that pressure every single day. Every footstep outside your cell becomes a potential warning. Every echo in the hallway makes your heart race. Every unexpected movement from a guard forces you to wonder whether this moment is safe or the moment everything ends. Most people cannot fathom the psychological strain of living in constant danger like that. Danger you cannot fight, cannot run from, and cannot negotiate with. But while Chris Watts lives under that cloud of fear inside Dodge Correctional Institution, there are people outside those walls who carry a far heavier burden. Shanann's family is living with a level of grief that never softens. Her parents lost a daughter and 2 granddaughters, 3 generations taken from them at once. Her brother lost his sister, his nieces, and the chance to ever watch them grow. Friends, co-workers, and relatives carry trauma that still follows them into every birthday, every holiday, every quiet moment of memory, and Watts is painfully aware of this. He knows that while he sits alone in a concrete cell, the people who loved Shanann, Bella, and Celeste are still living through the aftermath of what he did. He stole their futures. He destroyed 3 lives and forever altered countless others. He took the lives of 2 little girls who adored him, who trusted him, and who believed their father would always protect them. He murdered a woman who was carrying his son. That truth doesn't fade. It doesn't weaken. It doesn't loosen its grip. There is no apology that can match the damage, no explanation that can repair the loss, no sentence long enough to balance what he took. All Chris Watts can do now is sit with the reality of his actions, the fact that he shattered an entire family, and face the world knowing that, through his own prison interviews, he exposed just how calculated, deliberate, and cold his decisions truly were. Prison communication runs deeper than most people realize. Notes slide under doors. Messages travel through vents. Conversations move through pipes in whispers. Information rarely stays in one place. The moment someone learns a high-profile inmate is on the move, word can spread faster than officers can react. Even in segregation units, inmates find ways to stay informed, and a name like his carries weight. Not admiration, not interest, but anger, resentment, and the kind of attention that forces officers to stay 2 steps ahead at all times. This tension is not spoken aloud, but it shapes how the facility moves around him. It changes how long a door stays open. It alters which officer escorts him. It determines how many steps he takes before anyone else is allowed to enter that same space. Suspense builds in the moments when silence meets uncertainty, lights flickering during routine checks, alarms sounding in neighboring units, officers rushing past without explanation. In prison, no one explains anything to the men locked inside their cells. When something shifts in the building, inmates are left with only imagination, and imagination in a place like this can be as dangerous as reality. For someone in Watts' position, that silence forces him to think about every possibility. An inmate transfer gone wrong, an altercation in the hallway, a security breach that pulls officers away from their stations. He cannot see it, but he can feel the tension ripple through the walls. Then there are the unexpected moments. A new inmate brought into the unit with a reputation, a staff member unfamiliar with the protocols, a temporary assignment that pairs an officer with someone they've never worked with before. Every unfamiliar face becomes a variable he cannot predict. Each change in staffing brings a different level of experience, a different style of movement, and a different level of awareness. All it takes is one person misreading a situation, one person assuming a hallway is clear, one person unlocking a door without checking twice, and the entire protective structure can collapse in seconds. Suspense deepens when you realize that prison incidents rarely make the news. Most situations are handled internally, documented quietly, and filed away without public attention. That means no one on the outside knows when tensions rise. No one knows when threats increase. No one knows when someone tries something reckless. Everything hidden behind these walls stays hidden unless it reaches a point that cannot be ignored. And that silence leaves the audience with one unsettling truth. The most dangerous moments in his life are not the ones already reported. They are the ones that could happen at any time, without warning, without witnesses, and without the world ever knowing how close things came to changing everything. This is the suspense that surrounds him. A world where danger exists in shadows, mistakes carry consequences, and the difference between an ordinary day and a catastrophic one is measured in seconds. Not because someone is coming for him, but because the environment he lives in never stops shifting, never stops testing the limits of safety, and never guarantees that the precautions protecting him today will hold tomorrow. Chris Watts will carry these memories for the next 30, 40, or even 70 years, however long his body holds on. But the question people still argue over is this: does he actually feel remorse, or is every word he says just another performance? In prison interviews, Watts has claimed he feels terrible about what he did. He's said that he thinks about his daughters every day. He's written letters apologizing to Shannon's family. He's spoken about regret, guilt, and wishing he could undo the past. But many people don't buy it. They believe his remorse isn't grief, it's self-pity. They question whether he's mourning his victims or mourning the destruction of his own life. Is he sorry for the crime, or simply sorry that he's locked away for the rest of his days? The truth is, no one can see inside his mind, and we may never know whether his regret is real or rehearsed. But here's the part that matters. It changes nothing. Whether he feels genuine guilt or not, he will still remain behind those walls. He will still wake up in the same concrete box. He will still face the same consequences for the rest of his life. And no apology, real or fake, will ever bring back the people he murdered. There's another debate that has followed his case for years: the cost of keeping him alive. Housing an inmate in a facility like Dodge can cost taxpayers tens of thousands of dollars each year. Over the course of his expected lifetime, Chris Watts could cost the system more than $2 million. Some argue that this money could be spent elsewhere. But there's a counterpoint critics often miss. Execution is frequently more expensive than life imprisonment once you account for mandatory appeals and legal safeguards. And more importantly, many people believe that keeping him alive, in isolation, in fear, in hopelessness, is a more fitting punishment than death. To them, death would be a release. Living in a 6x9 cell with no end date is the real sentence. And that brings us to the question that still divides people to this day: which is worse, life in prison or the death penalty? For most of this video, you've seen what Chris Watts's reality actually looks like: the isolation, the constant threat, the mental unraveling, the absence of hope. Supporters of capital punishment argue that someone who murders his own family doesn't deserve to keep breathing. They believe execution is the only true form of justice. But others say the opposite, that life in prison, especially this kind of life, is far harsher. Death is final, but life in a concrete box, decade after decade, forces a person to confront their crimes every single day. There is no relief, no release, no moment where it ends. Chris Watts is in his 40s. If he lives an average lifespan, he could spend another 30, 40, or even 70 years in prison. That's 4 to 7 decades, living exactly as he lives right now. 4 to 7 decades inside a 6x9 cell. 4 to 7 decades of isolation, fear, routine, and regret. 4 to 7 decades with no future, no freedom, and no hope. So now the question comes back to you. After hearing the facts, after understanding what his life truly looks like behind those walls, do you believe life imprisonment is the harsher punishment? Is Chris Watts getting what he deserves? Or do you think the death penalty would have been more appropriate? Tell me, what's your verdict? If you think this case was disturbing, wait till you hear what happened in the next one. Another family destroyed, but for a reason no one saw coming. Tap the next video before someone else spoils it for you.